Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Good, bad, and crazy. And may I say, Jim, at the risk of setting expectations too high, really good, really bad, and really crazy today. We are going to the extremes, perhaps, on some of the stuff. But let's start with the really good, because that's always nice. The original story here from Bloomberg, which you chronicle in the Morning Jolt, but it also refers to a letter in the New England Journal of Medicine. The COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer and biotech showed a high ability to neutralize coronavirus strains first detected in Brazil, the UK, and South Africa, according to a new study. In lab experiments, the shot demonstrated, quote, roughly equivalent levels of neutralizing activity against the Brazil and UK strains compared with a version of the virus from early last year. It also showed robust but lower activity against the South Africa variant, again, according to a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine. And so, Jim, when these variants were popping up, as variants will do with just about any contagious strain, some folks were wondering if the vaccines would still be quite effective against them. And while I'm sure there's more testing to do since this is relatively new research, the early returns are yes, and emphatically yes.
Yeah, and look, it feels like you're starting to see, you can almost sense behind the scenes that there's this, if not a battle, then a strong disagreement amongst science writers. And I would point out that while I've been writing about the coronavirus pandemic for going back to last January, I don't necessarily consider myself to be a science writer, certainly not a top tier one. And you can see that they have these different viewpoints, and there's this irritation amongst some who really dive into this stuff to feel like there is kind of a fear-mongering tone to the discussion about variants, because viruses mutate all the time. And this is kind of an inevitable fact of life. They're not going to stay the way. They're constantly encountering immune systems and either being defeated by the immune systems or evolving and, changing and developing some new ability to make them tougher against immune systems. Two other points that I would point out. First of all, if the Pfizer vaccine works against all of them, super duper terrific. We don't need to worry about this. Then you don't need to constantly live in a state of fear about, oh God, what if I catch the South African one or the UK one? By the way, I noticed that it's, ludicrous that we are, using the term Wuhan flu was instantly decided to be a hate crime, and you can never, ever do that. But it's totally okay to say South African variant, UK variant. Yes, I've heard those arguments. Yes, it's a ludicrous double standard. But I'm going to move on from that. And there's 2 points it's worth noting. The first is that if, God forbid, one of these variants does prove to be really tough and the vaccines don't work, that are currently on the market, don't work against it, Pfizer and Moderna have said they can probably get within 6 weeks, they can develop a booster shot against a variant. Moderna, in fact, is already working on one targeting the South African version. So it's not going to be another year-long wait until we get a vaccine that can work effectively against this. Our ability to develop variant-specific vaccines is, advancing really quickly, and it's going to give us a strong advantage. And there's no reason to think, oh God, there's going to be another variant that comes along, and that puts us back to square one again. Now, there's a section, the New Yorker has a really good article about this in the most recent issue. You get a certain number of free articles per month, and I think this is one worth spending that free article on. But he quotes a virologist who says, has done a lot of research on this, and says, quote, there's just not a lot of space for the spike to continue to change in ways that allow it to evade antibodies but still bind to its receptor. You've seen the images of the coronavirus, the green ball with the red spiky things. The red spiky things are what help it kind of bond to the other cells and get into it and cause, kind of advance the infection, right? Substitutions that allow the virus to resist antibodies will also decrease the affinity for ACE2, which is what allows it to enter the cells. So the short version is it's running out of room. It's running out of its ability to evolve and change in ways that will make it more dangerous. And if you read John Barry's history of the 1919 pandemic, they made this very interesting argument about the concept of evolution and reversion to the mean. And he points out that it's not an ironclad law, but it's more of a recurring pattern, which is that, let's say you have a virus and it mutates in a way that makes it really, really virulent, about as virulent as it can get, and really, really contagious, about as contagious as you can get, which is kind of what was happening with the influenza virus back in 1919. Well, The good news is that when it gets as bad as it can get, all subsequent mutations are more likely to make it less virulent and less deadly to people. And that's kind of what happened with that particular strain of the influenza virus. That it basically, over time, it grew less dangerous because it had run out of room to go in the bad direction. And so eventually all subsequent changes brought it closer to the good direction. We don't worry as much about viruses that aren't as virulent and that aren't as contagious. So short version, there's a lot of good news on the vaccination front, a lot of good news about worrying about the variants. We're not completely out of the woods yet, but people really should not be hiding under their beds worrying that they can't go out and live their lives once they're vaccinated because they're afraid of the South African variant or any of these other variants floating around out there.
Yeah, excellent news because, it's just a few weeks ago when we were wondering what the effect of the variants would be. Fauci was talking about, a few more months for another vaccine for this one. And now you've got, if this research proves out to be true, you're not going to need that. How good is that in getting back to normal, hopefully? All right. Well, let's talk about protecting not only your health, but protecting your online situation and your data, social media and big tech, trying to curb your free speech a lot of times by attempting to deplatform speech they just don't agree with. So you could just deactivate all your social media accounts, but in one way that would be giving them exactly what they want. So instead of letting big tech try to control your speech, why not revoke their right to your data? That's why you should choose to protect your online data by using ExpressVPN.
Have you ever wondered how those free-to-access social media companies make all their money? Well, they do so by tracking your searches, your video history, and everything you click on. And then they sell your valuable data. When you use ExpressVPN, you anonymize much of your online presence by hiding your IP address. That makes your activity more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. What's more, ExpressVPN encrypts 100% of your data to protect you from eavesdroppers on your network. And the ExpressVPN app could not be any easier to set up. You just tap one button on your phone or computer, and you're protected.
It's finally time to say no to censorship and take back your online privacy with the VPN you can trust at expressvpn.com/martini. By visiting our link, you'll get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN service for free. Again, that's expressvpn.com/martini. expressvpn.com/martini to protect your data today. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now, and this one has multiple layers to it. We're talking about H.R. 1. It's called the For the People Act, and this would be the Democrats' efforts to put a much greater federal role in how elections are run rather than the states deciding how they want to do that. And, of course, any opposition to it is described as voter suppression by Democrats and their allies in the media. But that's not exactly what's happening here. Some folks have done a good job of cataloging all the concerning parts of this. Jarrett Stepman over at the Daily Signal, part of the Heritage Foundation, has done so. First of all, it forces states to implement mandatory voter registration, mandates that states allow all felons to vote, forces states to extend periods of early voting, mandates same-day voter registration, I guess, everywhere. Prohibits election observers from cooperating with election officials to file formal challenges to suspicious voter registrations. It criminalizes protected political speech, which I'll expand on in just a moment. There's going to be a uniform federal approach to laws about voting by mail, so the states aren't allowed to make up their own decisions there. It kills voter ID laws, and it mandates that states adopt new redistricting commissions, meaning that legislatures will no longer have the same role that they have had in the past in doing so. And my guess is that the Democrats have a way of figuring out how to get control of these nonpartisan commissions. When it comes to the free speech issue, Ryan Morrison of the Institute for Free Speech, writing over at the Dispatch, talking about some of the concerns on that front. It says that an advocacy group could put out an issue ad, and if they just mention the name of a member of Congress, their entire donor list then becomes public, and then you can get your donors harassed, like Joaquin Castro did in his own district in Texas last year by outing the people who supported Donald Trump with financial contributions. There's also the major concern about the government pouring public funds as matching funds, even beyond the contributions that candidates actually get. So more and more of a federal involvement in this issue. There's a lot of reasons to hate this bill, but another weird twist here. The Bulwark, supposedly principled conservatives, it's Bill Kristol, Charlie Sykes, and that ilk who went anti-Trump and then really haven't come back to conservatism, although they claim they have, put out a big story, and they've done several stories about why H.R. 1 is great, because they're all part of this pro-democracy movement. And so they think this is the way to do it, and that Republicans, by the way they've acted since the election, are all obstructionists and voter suppressionists and so forth. But they must have gotten a backlash, or maybe there actually is an opposing viewpoint over there, because Sykes actually wrote a column today talking about why he's opposed to H.R. 1 in fairly strong terminology. So, Jim, a lot to dissect here, but by and large, the biggest thing here is it's a terrible piece of legislation that we hope never becomes law.
Yeah, and we've reached the point where I just don't trust any Democratic complaint about the voting system. I also don't trust a lot of Republican complaints about the voting system. I think it actually works pretty darn well. But I'll take as just an example. The state of Iowa just decided to push forward some voting reforms. And here's how NBC describes it as: the Iowa governor signs Republican bill restricting voting access. Now, if you read that, you're like, oh my God, some people who could vote before now can't vote? That's terrible. That's not actually what the legislation does. There are three changes that it makes that makes you see how scary and terrible they are. The first, Greg, is that polls now close at 8 p.m., not 9 p.m.
Oof, terrible.
An hour, all right? Now, again, does this make it tougher for people to get to the poll? I guess maybe on the margins. You got to, if you're going to leave after work, leave a little bit earlier or get it done before work. I cannot really believe that shortening the election day polling hours by 1 hour constitutes restricting voting access. Also, they're restricting early voting. Now, look, there was a lot of interest in early voting this past year because of the pandemic. People didn't necessarily want to be in a polling place where it'd be very tough to maintain social distancing and things like that. They're restricting the days for early voting from 29 days to 20 days. You still got 3 weeks. You're going from a month to 3 weeks. I don't see that as some draconian, authoritarian, scary. How could they do this? This is the end of free elections in America. Look, in a non-pandemic environment, there's 3 weeks of early voting should be fine. There's really no reason to think that extra month, that extra week is going to make a huge difference. And the third thing is something you and I have talked about on podcasts going back to last year. If you have a mail-in absentee ballot, it has to arrive by Election Day. Instead of up until then, it was postmarked before Election Day. They don't want lots of people mailing lots of ballots or trying to stuff the ballot box on that last day or something like that. I have argued I want one clear, consistent deadline for turning in a vote. I don't want a situation where you can turn in all kinds of ballots and then these other group of voters over here, they're allowed to turn in theirs later. I think the case for that is self-evident. I think that's a good effort to prevent cheating and fraud and mischief and things like that. And none of these things that are going on in Iowa strike me as anywhere near restricting voting access, as NBC News calls it. So there's an enormous amount of bad faith into this stuff. So I don't want to spend an enormous amount of time kicking. By the way, Greg, is it bulwark or bulwark?
I say bulwark, but who knows? I don't spend a lot of time on that site.
It was bulwark, and it sounds like I'm joking that the guys over there don't work. But really, that's always the way it was pronounced. So this came out, and we're used to the bulwark set itself up as being the anti-Trump voice of conservatives, but it was also conserving conservatism from Trumpism and all that kind of stuff. I suspect if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already have a very clear opinion on those guys over there. But the interesting question would be that as Trump departed the presidency and without Twitter, he's making a much less consistent presence on the political scene. What was the mission of the bulwark going to be? Could it exist without Trump? And if so, what was its mission and purpose going to be? Well, when you are pushing for H.R. 1, you are not conserving conservatism. You are not standing for anything resembling traditional conservatism of the Republican Party or that. You are now full-on progressive Democrat, if that's the case. And it was like, I guess I should give credit to Charlie Sykes because, first of all, like lots of times people will find two different authors at National Review who have two different viewpoints on an issue. We'll run both pieces and somebody will say, life comes at you fast. Look at the National Review flip-flopping. It really shouldn't shock you that Jay Nordlinger and Victor Davis Hanson have different viewpoints on a whole bunch of stuff. It shouldn't stun you that Kevin Williamson and Catherine Lopez might have different viewpoints on stuff. Like, we have a lot of writers, we have a lot of guest contributors, and it's not shocking that, that having been said, it was fascinating to see the Bulwark, I believe, as their main article to be, HR1 is terrific and pro-democracy and pro-America, and there are no good legitimate reasons to oppose this. And for Charlie Sykes, almost like the newsletter equivalent of running in yelling, "Stop, stop, wait!" Saying, well, actually, no, this is actually a bad bill, and this actually does a whole bunch of stuff that we as conservatives can't support in good con. So on the one hand, good for you, Charlie Sykes. It takes guts to stand up to your colleagues like that. On the other hand, I have, Charlie Sykes is a pretty big mover and shaker over there. I almost wonder how much the editorial chain of command at the Bulwark read through that first piece, because if it wasn't an official institutional endorsement of it, it certainly looked like one. And it looks kind of odd for Charlie Sykes to come out the next day and say, well, actually, wait a second. No, what's wrong with HR1? A lot. And that's a tragedy, it says. He, to his credit, he really rips into it. But he also has to acknowledge the fact that a whole bunch of his colleagues have written, full-throated defenses of this and pretended like there was no legitimate argument against it. So kind of bad to see some, conservatives, and you can see me making air quotes. You can't see me, but just trust me, I'm making air quotes when I say that. Some conservatives coming to bat for this bill and not really thinking through it. I don't know whether it's just reflexive anti-Trumpism that, anything that Republicans oppose must be good, or whether actually this is a progressive Democrat publication in large part now. And, those of us who still think of ourselves as conservatives really don't need to spend much time paying attention to it anymore.
Just talking about the other authors that are full-throated in support of this legislation. Jonathan Last, a Weekly Standard alum, said, quote, "The GOP is a revanchist, if I'm saying that right, minority, which is why their only paths forward are geographic leverage and voter suppression, which is why the D's first priority should be expanding voting rights. That's the cornerstone of the pro-democracy movement." So, Jim, it's just amazing between the Lincoln Project and some of the folks over at the Bulwark how principled conservative equals Democrat with a capital D now.
Yeah, I guess just the fair question. If you can complain about the modern Republican Party, there's a lot to complain about. It's got its share of grifters. It's got its share of rabble-rousers and guys who are in it, and conspiracy theorists. And look, I'm not going to pretend there's no significant problems there. But I think it's fair to ask any institution that has anything like conserving conservatism in the title. So where do you oppose the Democratic Party these days? And what you doing about it? Because otherwise you're the other thing, what distinguishes publications that head in that direction? What makes you different from all the other progressive liberal publications out there? And, sometimes it gets pretty tough to figure out.
It is amazing. Although you make a good point. Following January 6th, arguments from some on the right are going to perhaps not be as powerful as they would have been as this debate goes forward. So we'll see what happens in the Senate based on the filibuster comments from Joe Manchin yesterday. He's looking for a way to wiggle out of his prior commitment and find a way to get this done. So I would have said a week ago that this was unlikely to pass. Now I'm not so sure. And that's definitely bad, too. All right. Well, let's talk about something that isn't bad. Let's talk about a good pillow and the other products from MyPillow, because now MyPillow giving the same attention that they've given their pillows to their towels and sheets. Right now, 3 Martini Lunch listeners can buy one, get one free on all 6-piece towel sets and the Giza Dream Sheet sets.
MyPillow towels have proprietary technology that makes them highly absorbent. They are soft to the touch without that lotiony feel. It's got a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. They're washable, they're dryable, and there are 7 colors to choose from.
The MyPillow Giza Dreams bed sheets are made with the world's best cotton. The sateen weave gives them a luxurious finish and will have you sleeping great. I can attest to that. Also, 10-year warranty and 60-day money-back guarantee. Washable and dryable. Also, a wide variety of colors and sizes. Visit MyPillow.com to learn more. And right now, as I said a moment ago, 3 Martini Lunch listeners can get all 6-piece towel sets and Giza sheets, buy one, get one free. Just use the promo code Martini at checkout or call 800-874-0104. That's MyPillow.com, code Martini, or call 800-874-0104. Buy one, get one free, all 6-piece towel sets and Giza Dream Sheets. Jim, our first and third martinis might sound a tad schizophrenic to some, but I believe they are thoroughly consistent today. We have seen excellent evidence that the vaccines are effective, but should you have to get them? Not should you get them, but should you have to get them? And should you be restricted from engaging in what used to be normal activities if you don't get it? On CNN over the weekend, Fareed Zakaria had Arthur Kaplan, well-known ethicist. He's at New York University now, and he's been a talking head on a number of key issues over the decades. And they're talking about the issue of vaccine passports. And Kaplan says, yes, they're coming. Yes, they're a good thing because of the freedom that they will provide. Here's how he put it.
Well, there is always a danger of a slope, but I think here what's different is traditionally we want to protect health information because if someone finds out you have an illness or a disease, they may discriminate against you. They may penalize you. They may say you can't get a job, you can't get insurance, you can't get disability insurance, you can't get life insurance. With a COVID certification, you're going to gain freedom, you're going to gain mobility, and I'm going to suggest that you're probably going to be able to get certain jobs. If you want to work on a cruise ship, I can't imagine that they're not going to be advertising that everybody who's on the staff and the crew is vaccinated, so come on back. So the difference, if you will, is it often is the case that health information, when released, threatens to harm you. In this case, being vaccinated threatens to benefit you. It goes in the other direction.
But of course, Jim, if this vaccine passport gives some people, those who have gotten vaccinated, the freedom to do these things, it will also restrict other people from being able to do those same things that they want to do. I think this is a tremendous infringement on freedom, whether it's smart or not, to refuse the vaccine. And also, if the vaccines are quite effective, which they appear to be, the only people at risk are the people who didn't get the vaccine. So why not let them run at their own risk? How do you see this?
Yeah, so we've kind of hinted and alluded to this in past episodes of our podcast, and I kind of wanted to hold off until it was a real live issue, until you started seeing enough people getting vaccinated that it made sense to start having these discussions. Well, I think now we've reached that point. I think we're up to 92 million shots administered. Significant numbers of seniors now have both shots, and it's, you're now reaching the point where we've got a chunk of society that is now fully vaccinated, which is great news. But we've also got a larger chunk of society that is not vaccinated yet, and the question is going to be, okay, how do we divvy that up? I'm generally skeptical of the idea of having a vaccine passport. Yes, they give you a card, but if for listeners who have already gotten a shot, know this. Those who haven't, don't. Maybe they've seen them. Those little cards they give you, these are not like real passports. These are not your credit card or your driver's license. These are not the sort of things going to be really tough to duplicate. So the moment having a completed, passport, a little card that says, yes, I've gotten both doses, or one dose if you got the Johnson & Johnson one, the moment you're allowed to do certain things, say go to a ball game or get on a domestic flight or go to a concert or get into some sort of, crowded location. Well, you're allowed in if you have one of these cards. If you don't, you'll instantly see, poof, a black market in fake vaccination cards, which is exactly the scenario we don't want to have happen here. The second thing is, how do you enforce it? There's one circumstance in which I believe this makes sense, and that is international travel, because that generally requires a real passport, not just a vaccine passport. And lots of countries have vaccination requirements. If you've traveled outside of, the U.S. and Canada Canada, Europe, there are a couple of countries you don't really need any. But if you've traveled any place, a couple of years ago when I went to Turkey, they basically turned me into a pincushion. All of a sudden, if you're going to be over there, you got to get this vaccine, that vaccine, and all of a sudden you jab. And that's kind of a well-established thing. Traveling internationally is a privilege, not necessarily a right. If you want to go into a particular country, you have to abide by their laws, and one of them is going to be, we need you to get this vaccine. So it's perfectly fine for other countries to say, you want to come here, we got to see proof of vaccination. Fine. For Americans, American citizens in the United States, the restrictions are much less okay. And the moment you give people certain privileges or certain things that they can do with the vaccination card that they can't, you create this incentive, and you're going to create people who are going to want to do this. You're going to create resentment. The other thing is having this discussion when we're at a point where, look, I'm glad we've got 92 jabs into people. I'm glad that it's getting easier. More people I know are saying, oh, my parents have been able to get a shot. My grandparents are getting a shot. I qualify for this category, so I'm supposed to get mine in 2 weeks or something. That's all great. But there are a whole bunch of Americans who can't get them right now, and a whole bunch of Americans who, look, the good news is they're young, they're healthy. The odds of the coronavirus, giving them a severe health impediment, pretty low. Not zero, but pretty low. The moment, though, you say, well, we're going to allow these people to do this and allow those people not, you're going to create instant envy. You're going to tear apart whatever social cohesion we've got left. And you're going to have lots of people creating fake vaccination cards. And look, you don't want the grocer having to check somebody to say, oh, you're not wearing a mask. Let me see your card. You don't want train conductors doing it. You don't want cops doing it. You don't want to create the vaccination police. That's going to get enormous pushback. It's going to have an enormous backlash. So this is generally a bad idea. The only scenario where I think it makes sense is in international air travel.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. It kind of reminds me, I know the circumstances aren't similar, but it kind of reminds me of the Obamacare individual mandate where you have to get it. And if you don't, you're going to get penalized. That didn't quite result in access issues, in fact, of where you could go and everything. But it did require you to pay a fine or a tax or whatever it was. But anytime the government is telling you you have to do something or you're going to be penalized, that's going to create more skepticism, not less. I don't think that's where the government wants to go here. And it's not necessarily going to be the government. It could be the private sector, could be businesses, could be whoever, might not be institutions, although I think schools will eventually get there. But when you take that tack, you're going to create more resistance instead of getting more cooperation. I think that's my guess.
Yeah, and let's point out that all of these issues can be revisited. We've seen discussions about whether you need to be vaccinated for schools. Most schools require, a certain number of those vaccines for the most serious and concerning ones. We can go back to this debate and discuss this a year from now. We can have this discussion 18 months from now. And maybe it will be more reasonable to say, yeah, if you haven't gotten a vaccine by now, we don't want you doing this because, you're at higher risk or something like that. But at this point, it's it's way premature to even and pretty much unjustifiable in just about every circumstance, particularly when so many Americans want the vaccine and still can't get it.
Well, we'll see where this debate goes. We have feared that might be headed in this direction, and it's still theoretical at this point. I don't know anyone that's actually done it, although we've talked about Ticketmaster planning for that and a couple of airlines overseas doing the same. So we'll find out just how far it goes, and we'll obviously talk about it if it does. Jim, have a great day as always, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Tell your friends about us, too. We're very grateful for those 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. We also invite you to get us on those home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us on Twitter. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Tuesday, and we'll see you again on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.
Hi, it's Dana Lash, host of The Dana Show. Every day, I'm here to keep you up to speed on the most important stories and info that you need to know in your very busy life. And if you're always on the go and you want to stay connected, just download our daily podcast and take it with you. It's a great way to get up to speed on what you need to know and what legacy media may not be telling you. Visit danaradio.com and click on the podcast link or subscribe at iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.